There is a very specific moment that, if you have ever been suddenly abandoned by a narcissist, your body remembers more clearly than your mind. Your chest drops, your thoughts go blank, your breathing becomes shallow, and your hand almost moves toward your phone on its own, even before you have decided what to do. You are not just sad, you are disoriented. You are pulled into a state of heightened alert, as if something crucial has vanished, and if you do not react immediately, you will lose your chance to understand what just happened. This is not a sign of weakness, nor is it because you loved too much. From a psychological perspective, it is the result of a deliberate interruption, a form of intermittent conditioning where a sudden withdrawal of attachment causes the brain to cling tighter, searching for signals to restore a familiar emotional rhythm. And that is exactly what a narcissist is aiming for when they disappear. Their sudden departure is not the end of the relationship. It is an act designed to activate your nervous system, forcing you to think, to guess, to react, and to fill the void they intentionally created. In that moment, you begin questioning yourself, rewriting the story in your mind, and taking responsibility for a silence you did not create. But when you examine this behavior not through emotion, but through structure, you begin to see that this is not about who left whom, it is about who controls whose pattern of reaction. And in today's video, we will confront that core truth directly. Being abandoned is not an ending, but a conditioning trigger that pulls you into response. And silence is not retaliation, but a conscious act of withdrawing the narcissist's access to your nervous system, your emotions, and your lived reality so you can step out without winning or losing, only reclaiming your freedom. And to understand why a single moment of silence from them can destabilize you so deeply, we need to pause emotional interpretation and return to where all reactions truly begin. Your nervous system. When a narcissist withdraws abruptly from your life without explanation, the first system affected is not logic, but the body. You are not simply sad. You become restless, shaky, unable to sleep, unable to eat, and your mind gets trapped in a looping replay. You may appear still on the outside, but internally your system is in alarm. Your heart rate increases, your stomach tightens, your breathing becomes shallow, and a powerful urge arises to do something to end the unbearable uncertainty. This is not weakness. This is biology. Attachment psychology and neuroscience show that the sudden disappearance of an attachment figure is processed as an unresolved threat. The human brain cannot tolerate prolonged uncertainty, especially when that uncertainty involves whether one is still chosen or still matters. Research on post-breakup distress demonstrates that individuals who experience abrupt abandonment report high levels of intrusive thoughts, automatic, repetitive mental loops alongside sleep disturbance and heightened physiological anxiety. A 2019 study by Verhallen and colleagues found that breakup distress strongly correlated with intrusive thought frequency and difficulty controlling those thoughts, while sleep disturbance was significantly higher in high distress groups. In plain terms, your insomnia and mental looping are not signs of emotional weakness. They are survival responses of an attachment system that has lost its anchor. This is where the rescue loop forms. When the brain lacks answers, it pushes behavior aimed at closing ambiguity, sending a message, making a call, writing a long explanation, re-examining memories to locate fault. Each action briefly restores a sense of control, but the relief fades quickly because the problem is not misunderstanding. It is a deliberate interruption designed to keep you reactive. A narcissist does not need your love at that moment. They need your movement. The mechanism driving this is intermittent reinforcement. In behavioral psychology, unpredictable reward patterns create highly persistent responding. This principle, demonstrated across decades of conditioning research, explains why gambling is so addictive. Uncertainty strengthens compulsion. Narcissistic dynamics mirror this pattern precisely: warmth followed by coldness, presence followed by disappearance. When they vanish suddenly, your brain does not interpret it as an ending, it interprets it as a broken signal that must be restored. Another layer intensifies the experience. Social rejection is processed as pain. Functional magnetic resonance imaging studies, beginning with the work of Eisenberger and Lieberman in the early 2000s, show that social exclusion activates brain regions associated with physical pain, particularly the anterior cingulate cortex. This explains why abandonment can feel like a physical blow. The body does not distinguish between social and physical injury. It only registers that a vital bond has been severed without warning. The critical shift here is this: you are not weak. You are responding exactly as a conditioned nervous system responds under unpredictable loss. Once you see the mechanism clearly, self-blame dissolves. The question changes from, "Why can't I let go?" to, "How do I calm my nervous system so my brain no longer hunts for signals from someone who gained power by controlling those signals?" That question does not lead you back to them. It leads you back to yourself. And from that point forward, the path out is no longer about understanding them. It is about reclaiming peace inside your own body. After the nervous system has been thrown into alarm, something more subtle and far more dangerous begins to unfold. Your understanding of reality is no longer fully yours. A narcissist does not merely leave. They leave behind a cognitive vacuum, and within that vacuum, a new story quietly forms. That story does not require their active narration. It emerges in your own inner voice, and what makes it so destructive is that it rarely takes your side. You start reviewing everything through a distorted lens. Maybe you said the wrong thing, maybe you overreacted, maybe you were too sensitive, maybe if you had been calmer, things would not have ended this way. These thoughts sound reasonable, but they signal a reality that has been hijacked. The critical factor is that a narcissist rarely exits with clarity. There is no honest conversation, no naming of issues, no defined boundaries. What they leave behind is ambiguity. And ambiguity is not accidental. Ambiguity is power. When explanations are absent, you are forced to supply them. When answers are missing, you speculate. And speculation under emotional threat leads the mind to fill gaps with self-blaming assumptions, especially if you have been conditioned to doubt your needs or perceptions to maintain harmony. Cognitive psychology shows that in attachment-threatening situations, people often assign blame to themselves to preserve a sense of control. If I am at fault, then at least the world still makes sense. At least the situation has logic. At least it can be fixed. The cost is that you slowly relinquish trust in your original perception. You remember being hurt, yet hesitate to affirm that hurt as valid. You recount the story to others, then immediately defend the person who caused the pain. This is not compassion. It is evidence that your interpretive center has been destabilized. Here lies the core mechanism: definition theft. A narcissist does not need you to believe they are right. They only need you to stop being certain that you are. They do not need to prove innocence. They only need you to question whether your memory is accurate, whether your emotions are justified, whether your reaction was excessive. Once self-doubt is installed, behavior no longer needs to be controlled externally. You will regulate yourself. This is why many people experience cognitive disorientation after abandonment. They sense something was wrong but cannot name it. They feel wronged but hesitate to claim mistreatment. They exist between two realities, one felt in the body and one rationalized away by the mind. Because seeds of doubt were planted earlier through gaslighting, denial, and blame shifting, those seeds continue to grow even in the narcissist's absence. The most damaging outcome of reality occupation is the loss of your position as a trustworthy witness to your own experience. You no longer stand at the center of your life narrative. You become the defendant in an invisible trial governed by standards you never chose. In this state, even the smallest signal from them, a partial message, an accidental encounter, can destabilize everything you have rebuilt. Not because they are powerful, but because your authority over meaning was taken long before they left. The turning point arrives when you recognize that the real question is not, "What did I do wrong?" but "Who was allowed to define what happened?" The moment you stop indicting yourself without evidence, when you allow your experience to stand without their validation, reality begins to return to its rightful place. This is not rebellion, it is cognitive reclamation. And from here, silence ceases to be confusion. It becomes a boundary, a refusal to continue living inside a reality written on your behalf. After the nervous system has been activated and your sense of reality has been taken over, there is still one final choice that determines whether you remain trapped in the loop or begin to step out of it. How you choose to be silent. And silence here does not mean being mute. It is not sulking, and it is not a psychological tactic meant to make the other person come back. Silence, in its true sense, is role withdrawal. It is the moment you step out of the character a narcissist has forced you to play for so long. The one who explains, the one who takes the blame, the one who chases, the one who smooths things over, the one who is expected to understand them. This is the point that genuinely frightens them. They are not afraid of your anger. They are afraid of you no longer playing your role, because when you are angry, you are still standing on their stage, you are still reacting according to their script. The chord is still there, it is just vibrating with frustration. But when your silence comes from awakening, the chord is no longer vibrating, it is cut, no movement, no energy, no living signal for them to read and manipulate. This difference may sound subtle, but in the narcissist's world, it marks the boundary between I still have power and I have just lost access. Silence born of anger usually carries an unspoken message. You know you were wrong, right? Are you going to come back and apologize? I'm punishing you. It still places the other person at the center. It still waits for a response to close the loop. It is still an attempt to pull them into behaving the way you want. And because of that, narcissists read it instantly. They know you are being silent, so they will chase you, which means you still need their recognition of your feelings. So, they either ignore you to make you anxious, or they drop a small bait to provoke a reaction. Both outcomes benefit them. Silence that comes from awakening is the opposite. It carries no hidden message at all. It does not demand understanding. It does not demand correction. It does not demand an apology. It is a single, direct act. I am withdrawing from the role. And when you withdraw from the role, you are doing something far more powerful than simply not replying. You are closing access to your nervous system. In other words, true silence is not about closing your mouth. It is about closing the gate. A narcissist does not control you through logic. They control you by activating your nervous system, making you confused, defensive, explanatory, afraid of loss, guilty, and then pushing you into fixing things. That is the access point. When you practice true silence, you are not merely saying nothing, you are refusing to let them touch your triggers. You do not allow them to pull you into a racing heartbeat, shallow breathing, and looping thoughts. You do not give them the chance to turn a conversation into a maze. You stand outside. And standing outside is not a passive position. Standing outside is a position of power, because you refuse the game at its point of ignition. This is where clarity of technique matters. Without clarity, you will unconsciously fall back into the correction trap. Narcissists are exceptionally skilled at creating conditions that make you feel you must speak up to set the record straight. They distort the story, speak in half-truths, spread narratives, and rewrite context. And the instinct of a decent person is to correct what is wrong. But with a narcissist, correction is the doorway. The more you correct, the more material they have to twist. The more you explain, the more they know you are still invested in being understood. That is why true silence rests on 3 non-negotiable pillars. No arguing, no explaining, no correcting. Not because you are wrong, but because you understand they are not searching for truth, they are searching for reaction. True silence is also not about disappearing to scare them as part of a psychological game. If your goal is still to frighten them, you are still revolving around them. Role withdrawal means you step back because you see the structure clearly, and you no longer allow your nervous system to be operated by someone addicted to control. You do not use silence to create an effect. You use silence to create a neural boundary. You begin responding with behavior rather than emotion, and you accept a cold but liberating truth. With a narcissist, the more you try to make things clear, the more tangled it becomes. The more you seek a clean ending, the longer you stay trapped. There will be moments when they escalate. They try every key to see which gate might still be open. That is not love. That is door testing. True silence means you give them no data. You let everything fall into a space they cannot control. And in that space, you begin to hear your own voice again, not the voice of confusion, but the voice of clarity. I no longer need to prove anything. Role withdrawal is a strict choice, because it forces you to endure the withdrawal from attachment, but in return, you reclaim ownership of your mind. And when you truly withdraw from the role, you understand something fundamental. You do not need to be strong to fight them. You only need to not step in. You do not need to win, because you are no longer playing. When you have withdrawn from the role and closed access to your nervous system, a narcissist rarely disappears the way you might expect. They change tactics. They begin searching for points of entry, not to love you again, but to test whether there is still a gate inside you that remains open, a narrow crack just wide enough for them to slip through and reclaim control. And when you look closely, hoovering is not a single act. It is a sequence of 7 intrusion doors. Each door is designed to trigger a specific neural reflex, forcing you to react before you have time to think. Your power does not lie in responding correctly, but in recognizing which door is being knocked on and locking it with one sentence, one action, short, cold, final. The first door is the curiosity door. This is the lightest knock, and also the most underestimated because it appears harmless. A brief, "Are you okay?" An emoji, a heart reaction, an instant story view, a vague, "I suddenly remembered," followed by nothing. This door is not meant to start a conversation. It is meant to activate the brain's orienting response, the reflex that makes you immediately turn toward a novel or ambiguous stimulus. Uncertainty causes a flicker of dopamine. What do they want? What are they thinking? And in that moment, you lose initiative. The way to lock this door is a single line: "I am not available for further contact." The locking action is silence, or one sentence, followed by muting or blocking. No explanation. Every extra word becomes data. The second door is the memory door. When curiosity fails to pull you out of calm, they strike the softest place, moments that once made you believe. A song, a place, a shared date, an old photo, a private reference only the two of you know. This door activates the brain's emotional memory and attachment network. Emotional memory does not function like an objective recording. It moves like a wave. It carries scent, tone, familiarity, and it often erases the reasons you had to withdraw in the first place. You forget subtle harm and remember when they were gentle. This is how they pull you out of the present and back into territory they once controlled. The way to lock this door is simple. I am not returning to the past. The action is to remove memory triggers, hiding photos, muting memories, unfollowing, disengaging from shared spaces. Memory is not proof of love. Memory is proof that you endured long enough to form attachment. The third door is the compassion door. This is when they adopt the role of someone who needs saving, overwhelmed, depressed, abandoned, sick, misunderstood, alone, with no one else who understands. They speak as if collapsing, so your caregiving instinct activates. This door triggers the rescue reflex. When you see someone suffering, the social brain automatically moves to soothe. In those who were conditioned to please, compassion is fused with guilt. If I don't respond, am I cruel? And the moment you open even slightly, they step through not with love, but with entitlement. The locking sentence is, I hope you find the support you need. The action is to refuse the role of emotional caretaker. If necessary, offer one appropriate external resource and stop. You can be humane without allowing intrusion. The fourth door is the presence door. When words fail, they use visibility and coincidence, appearing in familiar places, interacting with mutual connections, posting content meant to be seen, drifting through your environment like a shadow. This door activates the brain's threat monitoring system. Your mind begins scanning, watching, tracking, and the moment you track them, they regain centrality. The locking sentence here is internal. I am not interested. The action is to remove points of contact blocking, restricting, altering routines, minimizing shared spaces, disengaging from intermediaries. You do not prove indifference, you eliminate access. The fifth door is the hope door. This is the most sophisticated because it borrows the language of growth, healing, and accountability. I see the trauma loop now. I'm in therapy. I understand my ego. I take responsibility. They use the very vocabulary you once used to try to save the relationship. This door activates the brain's reward prediction system. Hope is addictive. The mind loves the story that this time it will be different. And because you once loved their potential, you are tempted into an invisible contract. Give them one chance to prove it. The way to lock this door is clear. Your growth does not require my participation. The action is refusing trial periods. Real change is proven over time, not performed for access. A person who truly changes does not use growth as leverage. The sixth door is the instability door. When sweetness fails, they use disruption, accusations, pressure, emotional debt, provocation, rage. You owe me. You think you're better than me. You can't escape this. This door triggers the fight response. Adrenaline rises. You want to defend, explain, correct. That is exactly what they need, for you to leave awakened silence and return to reactive silence. The locking sentence is firm. I am not engaging. The action is immediate. Disengagement, closing the chat, leaving the call, leaving the space, blocking if necessary. You do not stand in a storm to prove you are dry. The seventh door is the comparison door. This is when they present someone new or a new life as bait, displaying happiness, replacement, being understood, moving on quickly. This door activates social exclusion pain, processed in the brain similarly to physical pain. It makes you want to reclaim your position, prove your worth, show them what they lost. But this is the final trap, measuring your value through their eyes. The locking sentence is, I do not participate in comparison. The action is full visual disengagement, unfollowing, blocking, refusing to seek information, avoiding mutual updates. A person at peace does not monitor the life of someone who once destabilized them. All seven doors share one thing. They do not target logic. They target reflex. That is why you once knew better, yet still reacted. A door opened once becomes the door they knock on again. So locking is not about speeches. It is a cold rule. One knock, one sentence, one ending action. No negotiation, no extension, no need for understanding. The shorter you are, the less data they have to operate. And when you do this, you realize a difficult but liberating truth. You did not lose them. You are withdrawing from a system that once hijacked your nervous system. Hoovering is not love returning. It is access testing. When all seven doors are closed, you have removed the psychological map they use to locate you, and then your silence is no longer a void. It becomes a structure, a life where no one is allowed to enter by knocking on your wounds. There is a truth that, once you look directly at it, immediately lessens your pain. A narcissist does not panic because they lost you in an emotional sense. They panic because they lost their coordinates. They lost their internal map. They lost the system of signals they once used to read you, measure you, bend you, and pull you back into the position they wanted. For an ordinary person, silence may simply mean distance. For a narcissist, silence is a blank zone on the map, and they cannot survive in blank zones. Because if they do not know what you are thinking, if they do not know whether you are hurting or at peace, if they do not know whether you still remember them or have truly cut the cord, then they do not know what lever to pull. No data means no foothold. No foothold means no predictive power. And when a narcissist loses predictive power, the first thing that collapses is not the relationship, it is their sense of dominance. Understanding this mechanism prevents a dangerous misinterpretation. Many people, when they notice the narcissist returning, watching, probing, begin to romanticize it. They miss me. They cannot forget me. They still love me. That is not what is happening. What you are witnessing is not love. It is a desperate attempt to reconstruct a navigation system. Like an addict unable to tolerate the loss of a supply line. They are not searching for you because you are irreplaceable. They are searching for you because you once functioned as a feedback system. You reacted, you explained, you cried, you got angry, you proved, you came back. Every reaction you gave them became a landmark on their psychological map. They learned which words softened you, how long they had to disappear before you panicked, what kind of bait made you respond. When you fall silent, those landmarks vanish. You are no longer familiar terrain. You become unreadable. And for a narcissist, what cannot be read cannot be controlled. This is why true silence does not merely irritate them. It activates a specific form of panic. The panic of someone who can no longer see the strings they once pulled. Their entire operating system rests on one silent assumption. People always react. Whether the reaction is love or hate, tears or rage, chasing or cutting off, as long as there is a reaction, there is data. And data is what gives them the feeling of existence. But when you stop reacting, you do something deeply destabilizing. You stop emitting signals. You are no longer a readable organism. You become a void, a non-responsive surface. And what occurs inside them is not heartbreak. It is disorientation. They cannot locate themselves in your story anymore. From this disorientation emerges a secondary loop, the surveillance cycle. When they cannot access you directly, they observe. They watch your stories immediately, not because they care, but because they are scanning for signs of influence. They probe mutual contacts not to reconnect, but to extract indirect data. Are you mentioning them? Are you sad? Are you dating? Are your routines changing? They drop small baits, a like, a casual, "Are you okay?" a vague reminder. Each action is a temperature check. They resemble someone holding a signal detector, walking along a coastline where a lighthouse once stood, searching for proof of life. And the goal is precise. One response, even cold, polite, or irritated, is enough to restore a coordinate. One reply from you is not just a message, it is a location. You will notice their skill here. They do not always charge directly. Often they circle. They accidentally appear where you frequent. They post suggestive content to see if you react. They resurrect memories to see if your attachment still vibrates. They play the victim to see if your compassion remains accessible. Each maneuver is a door test. But beneath all of these doors lies a single measurement. Are you still predictable? Because to a narcissist, a predictable person is a controllable person. They do not need you to love them. They only need to know, if they press this button, what will you do? This is the most subtle point. The quieter you become, the more your nervous system returns to baseline, but the more chaotic theirs becomes. They were accustomed to a readable environment. Action A produced reaction B. Word X triggered response Y. From that consistency, they derived a sense of power, competence, even magnetism. Your silence introduces what psychology calls prediction error. Their behaviors no longer generate the expected outcomes. A system built on prediction does not simply become disappointed. When prediction fails, it panics. It escalates testing. It intensifies probing. It amplifies tactics. Because inside the system, one question refuses to dissolve. Why is this not working anymore? This is where many people make a costly mistake. When they see escalation, they interpret it as proof of significance. I still matter, and reopen the door. But escalation is not a sign of importance. It is evidence of losing control, and there is only one way for them to reclaim control, pulling you back into reaction. Not necessarily back into the relationship, just back into response. One explanation. One outburst. One attempt to clear things up. And the map lights up again. The coordinates reappear. They can breathe. So the conclusion here must be blunt. The fewer signals you send, the less predictive power they have. And when predictive power disappears, manipulation collapses. Not because you fought better, but because you did something they cannot process. You became unmeasurable. You are no longer a person whose buttons they can press to generate a known response. You no longer supply emotional data. You no longer transmit access codes. You become a quiet territory they cannot invade with drama. If you want to maintain this state, remember one harsh but liberating rule. Do not give them coordinates. Do not overshare through intermediaries. Do not post to prove you are okay. Do not use silence as a performance. True silence means withdrawing from being seen by them. You do not need them to know how you are living. You only need to know that you are living honestly. At first, this may feel empty, but it is a clean emptiness, free of interference, free of monitoring, free of extraction. And when that clean space endures long enough, something irreversible happens. You are no longer locatable by them. You become self-locating. You are no longer a point on their map. You are a life of your own, a nervous system of your own, a reality of your own. And that is what a narcissist hates most, not because they lost love, but because they lost what mattered more to them than love itself, the ability to predict you in order to control you. Once you stop emitting signals, stop allowing yourself to be located, and stop supplying emotional data for them to operate on, a phenomenon begins to unfold inside the narcissist, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that is structurally destabilizing. Silent collapse. It is essential to clarify from the outset that this is not pain born of love, nor is it grief as a psychologically healthy person experiences loss. This is structural failure, the disintegration of a system of self-regulation that depended on other people, now no longer functioning. At the image layer, the first thing to malfunction is the mask. The narcissist previously survived through image, the misunderstood one, the noble victim, the one who tried their best, the charismatic figure. That image existed only because it was constantly reflected by you. When you fall silent, the mask stops being updated. The tactics that once provoked reaction no longer generate results. As a consequence, they begin to require public reaction to patch the image, posting self-justifying content, speaking in half statements designed to provoke debate, recruiting others to validate their side, showcasing success, busyness, or happiness. This is not confidence, it is proof-seeking behavior. When an image requires constant proof, it is no longer stable. The mask remains, but it begins to glitch, sometimes excessively polished, sometimes excessively wounded, sometimes aggressively hostile. This inconsistency is the first visible sign of structural collapse. At the control layer, what they lose is not the relationship, but tactical effectiveness. The strategies that once worked disappearing to induce panic, attacking to provoke defense, sweetness to soften you, memory to pull you back, no longer trigger familiar reflexes. When tactics fail, the control system shifts into escalation. This is when outbursts appear: irritation, pressure, emotional debt claims, projection, labeling, or contradictory messages delivered in rapid succession. This phase is the most behaviorally volatile because they are attempting to force outcomes from a system that is already broken. This escalation is not genuine emotion, it is coercive effort to restore dominance. But control is meant to function quietly. When it needs to shout, it has already lost effectiveness. When both image and control fail to self-stabilize, the fracture drops into the identity layer, the deepest and most frightening level for the narcissist, the loss of reflection. A narcissist does not possess a stable, internally generated sense of self. Their identity is an aggregate of external feedback. When feedback disappears, they do not miss you emotionally. They no longer know who they are within your story. From this emerges emptiness, panic, and paranoia. They begin interpreting neutrality as threat. Your silence becomes conspiracy. Your calm becomes contempt. Your non-reaction becomes proof that you saw through everything. This is where the shadow emerges, the disowned parts of the psyche, flooding consciousness as suspicion, envy, and diffuse hostility. Not because of anything you did, but because the reflective surface is gone and the image has nowhere to land. The core point must be emphasized clearly. They collapse not because they lost you, but because they lost their mechanism of external self-regulation. Previously, every time anxiety surfaced, they could restore equilibrium by activating you a message, an argument, an apology from you. That was their generator. When it shuts down, they are forced to sit with their own unregulated distress, something they never learned how to do. This makes the collapse structural rather than emotional. It does not erupt as clear grief. It manifests as prolonged dysfunction, inability to predict, inability to control, inability to anchor identity. You may recognize this phase through contradictions, wanting to return but fearing return, monitoring you while resenting you, presenting stability while constantly probing. These contradictions are signs of a system attempting to patch itself through inconsistency. And here your role becomes critically clear. Do not become repair material. Every time you offer one last reply just to end it, you hand them a temporary adhesive. Each instance of awakened silence, by contrast, allows the structure to reveal itself honestly, unstable, unsustainable. It must also be said plainly, silent collapse does not equal transformation. Collapse only means the old mechanisms no longer conceal the fracture. Genuine change requires accountability, extended time, and the capacity to self-regulate without external extraction, a rare outcome. Your goal is not to witness their collapse in order to win, but to avoid being pulled back into the cycle of patching and rupture. You do not need their breakdown to validate your clarity. The fact that you are no longer their regulatory source is already sufficient. Finally, there is a cold but liberating truth. What hurts them most during silent collapse is not loneliness, but the loss of the illusion of permanent control. And what protects you is not hardness or confrontation, but the consistency of awakened silence. You do not need to push them into collapse. You simply need to not return to the old role. No reaction, no explanation, no correction, no reflection. In that state, no matter how desperately they attempt repair, the old structure has nowhere to anchor. And in that space, you, not them, are the only one who remains psychologically intact. Once you recognize that what is collapsing is not pain from love, but a failing structure, one practical truth becomes unavoidable. What saves you is not understanding them more deeply, but having an exit blueprint. Because insight without action easily turns into a new form of fixation. You may analyze correctly, yet your body still shakes. You may understand the mechanism, yet your hand still reaches for the phone. You may see the game clearly, yet still get pulled back at the weakest moments late at night, during loneliness, or when they drop a small emotional hook. That is why this section is not about motivational strength or emotional slogans. This is an exit blueprint, 3 real-world defensive layers designed not only to remove them from your thoughts, but from your nervous system, your perception of reality, and your daily behavior. The first layer is the nervous system layer, reducing activation, reducing reflex. A narcissist does not control you through logic, they control you through activation. They accelerate your heartbeat, tighten your chest, flood your mind with looping thoughts, and in that state you do exactly what they need: explain, justify, apologize, return, or at least react. To exit, you must cut off access to your nervous system. And this is where many people fail, because they underestimate how literal this step must be. This does not mean waiting to see what happens, muting temporarily, or keeping channels open out of politeness. It means a clear decision: block numbers, block social media, reduce intermediaries, and stop checking under the guise of curiosity. Every time you look, you reactivate yourself. You reopen the door visually and imaginatively. At the nervous system layer, you must also reduce conditions that weaken regulation: sleep deprivation, alcohol, compulsive scrolling, emotionally charged music, skipping meals. This is not generic wellness advice. It is anti-manipulation strategy. A depleted body seeks cheap dopamine, and a narcissist is cheap dopamine. One message, one reaction, one familiar cycle. That is why 3 minimum stabilizers function like antidotes: fixed sleep hours, regular protein intake, and daily walking to discharge adrenaline. You do not need perfection. You need a body that is harder to trigger. When the nervous system cools, reflex weakens. When reflex weakens, control disappears. The second layer is the cognitive layer, changing the question to escape the trap. Narcissists do not win because they are more intelligent, but because they force you to ask the wrong questions. You remain trapped in, do they love me? Why did they do this? What did I do wrong? If I explain clearly enough, will they understand? What if they change? These questions sound reasonable, yet they bind you to the axis they require. Proof, hope, self-doubt. The trap is subtle. The more you ask whether they love you, the more you return to the very person who destabilized you for answers. The replacement question must be colder and more freeing. What do they need from my reaction right now? When you ask this, the structure reveals itself. They need your confusion to feel important. They need your anger to justify blame. They need your explanations to pull you into a maze. They need your compassion to reopen rescue access. They need your jealousy to confirm influence. Changing the question changes your position from participant to observer, and you discover an uncomfortable but powerful truth. Many conversations with narcissists are not meant to solve problems. They are meant to generate states. Those states remove you from your center. So you anchor cognition with a stabilizing check. If this were a psychologically healthy person, what would they need? If this is a narcissist, what reaction are they trying to extract? This separates content from function. What they say matters far less than what they want to activate in you. The third layer is the behavioral layer: silence, discipline, non-explanatory boundaries, and a return plan. This layer determines outcomes because insight collapses without behavioral structure. Discipline here does not mean endurance. It means removing decision-making when you are vulnerable. First, silence discipline. Once you choose not to engage, you do not engage. No, polite reply. No, final message for closure. No, explanation so they understand. With a narcissist, the final message is simply the first message of a new cycle. Second, non-explanatory boundaries. The strongest boundary requires no justification. You do not owe them reasons for disengagement. You do not owe narratives of harm. Consistent action is the only message they register. Access revoked. Third, you must have a return plan, because they almost always reappear, especially once you stabilize. That plan includes one locking sentence, one locking action, and one external support. A locking sentence must be brief and debate-proof. For example, I am not continuing contact, I wish you well, or I am not participating in this conversation. You choose one sentence and repeat it verbatim. No creativity, no variation. Variation equals data. The locking action follows immediately. Notifications off, blocking, leaving spaces, closing the channel. The support element may be a trusted person or a self-intervention rule. When you feel the urge to reply, you contact them first, or you write down, I want to reply because I am activated, not because this is necessary. You must treat the urge to respond as withdrawal, not insight. There are two predictable tactics you must prepare for in advance. The first is false urgency: crisis, need, emergency, exclusive understanding. Decide beforehand that emergencies are redirected elsewhere, not through you. The second is reputation provocation: rumors, distortions, stories designed to trigger defense. Decide beforehand that you do not attend trials staged by them. You do not need to clear every narrative to live peacefully. Those who trust you require no proof. Those who require proof are not part of your safe perimeter. This may sound cold, but it protects your nervous system from being dragged back onto the stage. When these three layers operate together, something unexpected happens. You stop needing to be strong. Strength emerges as a byproduct of structure. Your nervous system stabilizes, cognition sharpens, behavior aligns, and the pull weakens naturally. That is real freedom. Not freedom because they disappear, but freedom because they no longer have a button inside you. And when there is no button, Every tactic becomes as meaningless as knocking on a house you moved out of long ago. The exit blueprint does not teach you how to defeat them. It teaches you how to no longer be a location they can return to. You do not need to become cold. You need to become structured, disciplined, boundaried, prepared. And once you are structured, the narcissist encounters what they resent most. You no longer belong to their system. You have stepped into your own one, where they have no access, no authority, and no power to define reality. When you look back at this entire journey, one truth becomes unmistakably clear, even though it is not easy to accept at first. You never needed to defeat the narcissist, because from the very beginning, it was a game designed to exhaust you if you tried to win. The rules were never fair, the stage was never yours, and the role assigned to you was always the same. The one who reacts, the one who endures, the one who explains, the one who keeps everything stable. The problem was never whether you were strong enough, smart enough, loving enough, or patient enough. The problem was that you were pulled into a system where your presence itself became the fuel. Everything we have examined here was not meant to help you understand them more deeply, but to help you understand why you stayed trapped for so long. When the body is activated, the mind is suspended in uncertainty, reality is hijacked, and you are forced into a role that never truly ends. Leaving is not a simple act of willpower. It is a structured withdrawal. And the critical point of that withdrawal is not saying more, doing more, or proving more. It is no longer appearing in the place where they need you to appear. Silence, in this context, is not avoidance. It is not retaliation. It is the moment you step off the stage. They constructed a stage where every spotlight, every conflict, every emotional climax was engineered around your reaction. When you disappear from that stage, not physically, but psychologically, the game collapses. Not because they suffer, but because there is no longer anyone performing with them. What must be stated clearly is this: you were not abandoned in the way you once believed. You were not discarded because you lacked value. What was discarded was your old role, the role of the person who was always available to react, to accept blame, to explain, to remain in ambiguity in order to preserve connection. When that role ends, a void appears. And that void is deeply uncomfortable. But discomfort is not proof that you are wrong. It is proof that your nervous system is withdrawing from a long-standing cycle of intermittent reward and punishment. Many people fear silence because they believe silence means losing, being rejected, or not being chosen. But psychologically, awakened silence is the first action you take that is not for them. You are not silent to make them return. You are not silent to make them regret. You are silent because you are no longer willing to surrender your nervous system, emotions, and reality to someone who survives by activating others. And that is precisely what shifts the power dynamic, quietly, without spectacle, but permanently. When you stop reacting, they lose the ability to locate you. When they can no longer locate you, they lose the ability to manipulate you. When manipulation fails, what collapses is not love, but the structure of control. And when that structure collapses, you do not need to witness it. You do not need closure from it. You do not need to wait for an outcome on their side. Your only task is not returning to the old role. You may not feel better right away. You may feel empty, disoriented, or miss something you cannot fully name. But remember this: discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. Discomfort is a sign that you are breaking free from an addictive loop. The brain hates unpredictability. The nervous system resists sudden change. Yet, it is precisely within this unstable phase that you reclaim something you did not know you were allowed to have the right not to react. So, if you are in the hardest phase of silence, when every impulse inside you urges you to text, explain, or end things properly, remember this: you do not need to win against them. You only need to stop being there. You do not need the perfect sentence. You only need to stay off the stage. Silence does not end them. It begins you again. And the final, practical guidance is this: if today you cannot hold silence perfectly, that does not mean you have failed. The moment you recognize which role you are being pulled into, and you stop sooner than last time, that is progress. Freedom does not arrive through heroic moments. It arrives through small, repeated choices, reacting a little less, explaining one sentence fewer, returning one time fewer. Piece by piece, you leave the stage. And when you have truly stepped off, you realize the game did not end because they lost. It ended because you stopped playing.